She clipped the final coupon with the meticulous care of a surgeon, the crisp snip of the scissors echoing in her quiet, sun-drenched apartment. The coupon was for $7 off a pack of organic cotton onesies. Her baby, a gentle flutter beneath her heart, deserved the best, and for Cassidy, the best meant being smart, being careful. A few miles away, in a glass-walled boutique shimmering with afternoon light, her husband Richard swiped a black credit card without a glance at the price. The charge, $20,000. It wasn't for their baby. It wasn't even for another woman. It was for a diamond-encrusted necklace for his mistress's dog. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of value of a marriage where a wife's loving frugality was mocked by a secret obscene extravagance that would shatter a family and expose the rotten core of a gilded life. Cassidy Holloway believed she was living a fairy tale, albeit a slightly modern, more complicated version. She hadn't been born into the world of old money and silent power that her husband Richard Holloway inhabited as easily as he breathed. She was a librarian from Queens, a woman who found wealth in the Dewey Decimal System and the quiet rustle of turning pages. They met in a way that felt scripted for a romantic comedy. He'd taken shelter from a sudden downpour in her library, and they'd bonded over a shared love for historical biographies. Richard had been charmed by what he called her authenticity. He loved that she didn't know the difference between a Monet and a Manet, that she wore sweaters from the Gap, and that her idea of a perfect evening was a classic film and a bowl of popcorn. He was the heir to the Holloway real estate fortune, a man whose life was a carefully curated collection of board meetings, charity galas, and weekends in the Hamptons. Cassidy, with her quiet intelligence and genuine warmth, was his beautiful grounding secret. Their first 2 years of marriage were a whirlwind of adjustments. Cassidy learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, smiling politely at women who assessed her dress and her pedigree in a single sweeping glance. She learned that Richard's mother, Caroline Holloway, a woman who looked as if she'd been carved from a glacier, would never see her as anything more than a charming but ultimately inadequate footnote in the Holloway family ledger. Still, she had Richard, and his love felt like a shield. He would hold her at night in their sprawling Upper East Side apartment with its panoramic views of Central Park and whisper that she was the only real thing in his life. And Cassidy, deeply and irrevocably in love, believed him. Now at 7 months pregnant, a new profound joy had settled over her. This baby, their baby, would be the bridge between their two worlds. This child would have Richard's ambition, and she hoped her own steady heart. The baby would be a Holloway, yes, but it would also be a part of her, a piece of Queens in a Fifth Avenue penthouse. This conviction was what led her to the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, a stack of parenting magazines and a pair of scissors before her. The Holloway family could afford to buy every baby item in triplicate from the most exclusive boutiques in Manhattan. But that wasn't Cassidy's way. She'd been raised by a single mother who taught her the value of a dollar and the quiet satisfaction of providing for your family through cleverness and care. Clipping coupons wasn't about necessity. It was an act of love. It was her way of connecting to her roots and in her mind to the practical, nurturing essence of motherhood. She imagined telling her son or daughter one day, "I was so excited for you to arrive, I spent hours planning and saving to make everything perfect." She held up a coupon for a brand of diapers praised for its eco-friendly materials. A small victory. She'd found another for a high-end baby monitor, 30% off. She hummed a little tune as she sorted them into a small accordion folder labeled Project Baby. Richard walked in, then dressed for the day in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her mother's car. He kissed the top of her head, his scent a familiar expensive mix of sandalwood and success. "What are you up to, darling?" he asked, his eyes scanning the colorful slips of paper with faint amusement. "Getting ready for the baby," she said, her smile wide and genuine. "Look, I found a fantastic deal on the crib we liked at Maison Bébé." Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Cassidy, you know you don't have to do that. Just tell my assistant what you want, and she'll have it delivered." The casual dismissal stung a tiny pinprick to her happy bubble. "I know, Richard, But I like doing this. It makes me feel involved, like I'm contributing. You're contributing by carrying our child, he said smoothly, turning to pour himself a coffee. That's the most important job in the world. Leave the small stuff to the staff. The small stuff. Her hours of research, her careful planning dismissed as trivial. She felt a familiar pang of otherness, the feeling that her values were quaint, almost comical in his world. But she pushed it down. He was just being Richard. He thought in terms of efficiency and delegation. He couldn't understand that for her this was a labor of love. I'll still probably use this one, she said, holding up the crib coupon with a touch of defiance. It feels good to save a little. We can put the extra money into the baby's college fund. Richard chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. Darling, the baby's college fund is already larger than the GDP of some small countries. Don't worry about it. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. I've got a breakfast meeting at the Carlyle. I'll be late tonight. We're trying to close the Hong Kong deal. Don't wait up. He kissed her again, a fleeting, absent-minded gesture, and then he was gone. The silence he left behind felt heavier than before. Cassidy looked at her coupons, the bright promises of discounts suddenly looking a little flimsy, a little foolish. She shook her head, blaming the pregnancy hormones for her sudden melancholy. Richard loved her. He was just busy. The pressure on him was immense. Her job was to create a peaceful, loving home for him and their baby. She spent the rest of the day in a flurry of nesting activity. She went to Bye Bye Baby with her folder of coupons, feeling a thrill of satisfaction with every dollar saved. She bought soft white onesies, tiny socks decorated with cartoon animals, and a gentle lavender-scented baby wash. She paid in cash, the crisp bills a tangible result of her savvy shopping. The total cost for a mountain of baby necessities was just under $300, thanks to her efforts. Back in the apartment, she began to organize the nursery. The room was already exquisitely designed, of course. A celebrity decorator had chosen a calming palette of dove gray and pale yellow. But it was Cassidy who folded the tiny clothes and placed them in the dresser drawers. It was she who assembled the mobile of little felt stars and hung it over the crib. As she worked, she talked to her baby, her voice soft and full of love. "Your daddy is a very important man," she whispered, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "He works so hard for us. But I'll teach you that the little things matter most. Love and kindness and knowing the value of what you have." That evening, as the city lights began to glitter to life outside the vast windows, she felt a wave of loneliness. Richard's late night at the office had become more and more frequent in the past few months. He always had a plausible reason, a deal, closing an international conference call dinner with investors. She tried to be understanding. His world was demanding. To distract herself, she decided to do something she rarely did, browse the celebrity gossip sites. It was a guilty pleasure, a mindless escape into a world even more absurd than her own. She scrolled through photos of actresses on yachts and singers caught in unflattering poses. And then she saw a headline on a popular blog called Gotham Gossip. June de la Renta's pampered pooch, the most spoiled terrier in Manhattan. Cassidy barely knew the name. June de la Renta was a somebody in the city, an art gallery owner with a penchant for dramatic fashion and even more dramatic social climbing. The article was frothy and ridiculous, detailing how June's Yorkshire Terrier, a tiny dog named Prince Maximilian, was treated to a life of absurd luxury. Cassidy chuckled at the photo of the little dog sitting on a velvet cushion wearing a tiny sweater. Then she zoomed in. Around the dog's neck, glittering under the flash of the paparazzi's camera, was a necklace. It wasn't a simple collar with a tag. It was an intricate, sparkling piece of jewelry. A cascade of small, brilliant diamonds set in what looked like white gold with a larger pear-shaped diamond at the center. The caption beneath the photo read, "Sources say the stunning diamond necklace, rumored to be a custom piece from the Cartier Le Bestiaire collection, was a recent gift to Prince Maximilian from June's wealthy and very married benefactor. The price tag, a cool $20,000. Must be nice. We wonder what his wife gets." Cassidy's heart gave a painful thud. It was beautiful, obscenely so. She felt a flicker of recognition but couldn't place it. She was about to close the tab, dismissing it as another example of the city's grotesque excesses, when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from their joint credit card, the one she rarely looked at, the one Richard used for business expenses. American Express alert. A charge of $20,000 has been approved at Cartier 5th Avenue. The date on the alert was from last Tuesday, the day Richard had a lunch meeting with the board. The air left Cassidy's lungs. Her blood went cold. She looked from the credit card alert on her phone to the gossip blog on her laptop screen. From the cold, hard number to the glittering diamonds around the neck of a dog. The necklace. The flicker of recognition. It wasn't the piece itself she recognized. It was the box. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by a silk pillow, was the corner of a distinctive deep red box with gold trim. She'd seen that same box tucked away in the back of Richard's closet months ago. He'd told her it was a gift for his mother, something for a special occasion that he was saving. Her husband had not spent $20,000 on a gift for his mother. He had not made a business expense. He had bought a diamond necklace for his mistress's dog. The baby inside her gave a sudden sharp kick, as if reacting to the violent shift in his mother's world. Cassidy stood up, her legs trembling. She walked over to the nursery, the beautiful calm room she had filled with love and carefully saved for treasures. She opened a drawer and pulled out one of the tiny soft onesies she had bought that morning. It had cost $7 after the coupon. She held the simple piece of white cotton in one hand. In her mind's eye, she saw the glittering, useless diamonds on the dog. $7 for her unborn child, $20,000 for a symbol of his betrayal. The fairy tale shattered. The gilded cage had sprung its trap, and Cassidy Holloway, the librarian from Queens, realized she was not in a romantic comedy. She was in a war, and she had just been handed her first, most devastating weapon. The initial shock was a physical blow. It was the silence of the apartment, once a sanctuary, now a soundstage for the roaring in her ears. Cassidy sank onto the plush dove-gray carpet of the nursery, the $7 onesie still clutched in her hand. Her mind raced, trying to find a different explanation, a logical reason that didn't involve the utter demolition of her marriage. Could it be a coincidence? Two separate $20,000 purchases at Cartier, one for his mother, one for... what? It was possible, she told herself, in the world of the Holloways, a world where money was an abstract concept. But the red box she'd seen in his closet, the timing, the gossip blog's snide comment about a married benefactor, it was a constellation of facts that pointed to one sickening truth. Her Richard, the man who held her and called her his anchor, was living a double life. And in that other life, he wasn't just cheating. He was mocking her. He was mocking everything she stood for, everything she thought they were building together. The coupons, her careful budgeting, her pride in being a practical partner, all of it must have seemed like a joke to him. A little game his quaint little wife played while he was out buying diamonds for a dog. The humiliation was a hot acid in her throat. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the grotesque disparity. It was the knowledge that the affection and resources that should have been directed towards their future, towards their child, were being lavished on the most frivolous, insulting symbol of his affair. She stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, her hand protectively on her belly. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing her distress. Her grief was a sharp physical pain, but underneath it, something else was beginning to smolder, a cold, hard anger. Caroline Holloway's icy condescension, the snickering glances of the society wives, Richard's own subtle dismissals, it all coalesced into a single clarifying thought. They had all underestimated her. They saw the librarian, the outsider, the sweet, naive girl from Queens. They had no idea who she was about to become. When Richard came home, it was well after midnight. He moved through the apartment with a practiced quietness, assuming she was asleep. She heard the soft clink of ice as he poured himself a drink in the living room. She rose, her body stiff, and walked out of the nursery to face him. He was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the city. He'd loosened his tie and taken off his jacket. Even in his exhaustion, he projected an aura of untouchable power. "You're still up," he said, turning. His smile faltered when he saw her expression. "Cassidy, what is it? Is it the baby? Are you okay?" The genuine concern in his voice was the cruelest cut of all. It was the performance of a lifetime. "I'm fine," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "The baby is fine. I was just reading. You know, light reading, a gossip blog." Richard's posture didn't change, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders. "That trash, darling, you shouldn't fill your head with that nonsense. It's bad for you. Bad for the baby." "I don't know," Cassidy said, taking a step closer. "It can be very informative. I learned, for instance, about the latest trend among the city's elite, buying extravagant jewelry for their pets. Did you know about that?" He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "The depths of stupidity in this city never cease to amaze me. What's next therapy for their houseplants?" He took a sip of his scotch, avoiding her eyes. The piece they featured was from Cartier, a diamond necklace. $20,000. She said, her voice as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. She watched his face, every micro-expression. There it was, a flicker in his eyes, a tiny muscle twitching in his jaw. It was all the confirmation she needed. "Well," he said, turning back to the window, "some people have more money than sense." "Yes," she agreed. "Some people do." She wanted to scream, to throw the laptop at his head, to show him the picture of the smug little dog and its glittering collar. But her newfound icy rage told her to wait. A hysterical pregnant wife was easy to dismiss, easy to gaslight, easy to manage. A calm, calculating woman with a grievance was a threat. "You look tired, Richard," she said, her tone softening with practiced deception. "The Hong Kong deal must be a killer." He turned back, relief washing over his features. He had misinterpreted her calm as acquiescence. "It's brutal," he said, walking towards her. "Endless calls, impossible demands. I'm sorry I've been so absent. As soon as it's closed, I'm all yours. Yours and the baby's. I promise." He reached for her, pulling her into a hug. Cassidy allowed herself to be held, her body rigid. She rested her head against his chest, right over the heart that she now knew was a liar. She could smell another woman's perfume on his shirt. It wasn't the bold, expensive scent of a society wife. It was something younger, sweeter, more floral. The scent of an June de la Renta. The next day, Cassidy began her new life. Outwardly, she was the same devoted, expectant mother. She attended her prenatal yoga class. She had lunch with the one friend she'd made in Richard's world, a woman who was, if not close, at least kind, and she discussed paint swatches with her mother on the phone. But inwardly, she was a detective. Her first move was to access the full statement for the American Express card. Richard was careless. He assumed she never looked. The password to the online portal was the name of his first dog, a retriever named Champ. The irony was not lost on her. The statement was a roadmap to his secret life. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard numbers. The $20,000 charge to Cartier was just the beginning. There were thousands of dollars in charges from June de la Renta Gallery. Were they legitimate art purchases for the company, or a way to funnel money to his mistress? There were weekly charges from upscale restaurants. Cassidy had never been to Balthazar Daniel. Per se, always for two. There were airline tickets. A weekend trip to St. Bart's 2 months ago when he was supposedly at a real estate conference in Chicago. A long weekend in Paris in the spring when he was meant to be visiting a Holloway-owned construction site in Dubai. And then she found the most damning evidence of all. A recurring monthly charge of $15,000 listed under Holloway Property Management. The recipient address wasn't a commercial building. It was a residential one. A luxury doorman building in Soho. Using a public records database she'd learned to navigate during her librarian days, she cross-referenced the address. The penthouse apartment was leased to one June de la Renta. Richard wasn't just buying her dog jewelry, he was paying for her entire life. The art gallery, the lavish apartment, the five-star vacations. And he was using his family's company, their company, to do it. Cassidy printed everything. The credit card statements, the public records, the Gotham Gossip article with its photo of the diamond-wearing dog. She created a file, a dossier of his betrayal, her hands moving with a steady, methodical purpose. The librarian was back in her element, gathering and cataloging information. Only this time the subject wasn't history. It was demolition. Her rage was no longer hot. It had cooled into something far more dangerous: resolve. She wasn't just going to leave him. That was too easy. He would pay a settlement, his reputation would take a minor hit among their circle, and in a year he'd be married to June or someone just like her. No. He had humiliated her. He had insulted her intelligence and devalued her love. He had risked the security of their child for his sordid little affair. He wasn't just going to lose his wife. He was going to lose everything. She knew that to do that, she couldn't fight Richard on his own terms. He was a master of manipulation, a titan in a world of sharks. She needed an ally. Someone with more power than Richard. Someone he was afraid of. And there was only one person in the world Richard Holloway was truly afraid of. His mother. Caroline Holloway. The matriarch of the Holloway Empire didn't just hold the family's respect. She held the purse strings. Richard was the CEO, but Caroline was the chairwoman of the board and the majority shareholder of the family trust. She had built the empire alongside her late husband, and she ruled it with an iron will. Caroline despised weakness, scandal, and more than anything, public embarrassment. She saw the Holloway name not just as a brand, but as a dynasty, and she would protect it at any cost. Going to Caroline was a monumental risk. The woman had never shown Cassidy an ounce of genuine warmth. She might just as easily side with her son and have Cassidy quietly and efficiently removed from their lives, with a gag order and a paltry settlement. But Caroline also had a rigid, almost puritanical moral code when it came to the family's public image. An affair was one thing. A messy public affair where company funds were being used to buy diamond necklaces for a social climber's dog was another. That wasn't just infidelity, it was a threat to the dynasty. Cassidy looked at the file on her desk. It was her ammunition. But she knew she couldn't just walk into Caroline's home and present it. She needed the perfect moment. She needed a stage, and she needed to be absolutely certain that when she fired her shot, it would be fatal. She closed the file. Phase 1 information gathering was complete. Phase 2 strategic planning was about to begin. She was no longer just Cassidy, the pregnant wife. She was a woman on a mission, and the quiet, unassuming librarian from Queens was about to teach the Holloway family the true meaning of the word consequences. The perfect stage, Cassidy decided, was not a private, tearful confrontation. Private confrontations could be denied, smoothed over, and forgotten. The perfect stage had to be public, or at least semi-public, within the Holloway's own rarefied world. It had to be a place where the humiliation would be amplified by the presence of witnesses Richard cared about. The annual Holloway Foundation Charity Gala was in 3 weeks. It was the pinnacle of the New York social calendar, an event Caroline Holloway orchestrated with the precision of a military general. It was a night dedicated to burnishing the Holloway family name, where hundreds of the city's most powerful people gathered to publicly fillet the family's philanthropy. To detonate a bomb in the middle of that evening would be an act of mutually assured destruction. Too risky. But the day after the gala, Caroline always hosted a private brunch at the family's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was a more intimate but far more significant event. The guest list was restricted to the family and the Holloway Foundation's board of directors, the dozen or so people who truly controlled the empire's levers of power. It was a debriefing of the gala and a strategy session for the year ahead. At that brunch, Richard would be performing the role of the dutiful son and visionary CEO. And at that brunch, his mother would be at the peak of her matriarchal power. That was the stage. Now Cassidy needed to prepare. She knew she couldn't face Caroline alone. The old woman's icy demeanor could freeze the truth on her lips. She needed to validate her story to have it delivered with a professional, undeniable weight. She needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one of the best. The kind of lawyer who made men like Richard Holloway nervous. She found him through a discreet referral from the only person in the Holloway orbit she trusted, Richard's younger sister, Clara. Clara was the family's black sheep and artist who had rejected the corporate world and lived in a sprawling loft in Tribeca. She and Richard had a strained relationship. He saw her as a flighty embarrassment, and she saw him as a soulless suit. Clara had always been kind to Cassidy, seeing her as a fellow outsider. Cassidy met Clara for coffee far from their usual haunts in a small cafe in the West Village. She laid out the story, her voice low and steady, omitting none of the humiliating details, the coupons, the dog, the Soho penthouse. Clara listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to a familiar simmering resentment towards her brother. "I always knew he was a bastard," she said, her voice laced with venom. "But this is a new level of disgusting. To do this to you now, he's not just a bastard, he's a monster." "I'm not going to let him get away with it, Clara," Cassidy said. "I'm not going to just take a settlement and disappear. I want to hit him where it hurts. I want to go to your mother." Clara's eyes widened. "Cassidy, be careful. My mother, she doesn't protect people. She protects the name, the business. If she thinks you're a threat to that, she'll crush you." "That's why I can't be a threat," Cassidy explained. "I have to be the solution. I'm offering her a way to clean house to cut out a cancer before it metastasizes and infects the entire Holloway brand, but I need help to frame it that way." Clara nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "I know just the person." The lawyer's name was Julian Croft. He was a legend in New York divorce courts, a man known for his silver-tongued steel spine and astronomical fees. He was known for representing the wronged wives of billionaires and systematically dismantling their husbands' empires. Cassidy, armed with her dossier, met him in his midtown office. It was a space designed to intimidate, with dark wood, leather-bound books, and a view that screamed power. Croft was in his 60s, impeccably dressed, with intelligent, assessing eyes that seemed to see right through her. She told her story for the third time, but this time it was different. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was presenting a case. She laid out the printouts on his vast mahogany desk. The credit card statements, the property lease for June's apartment, the article from Gotham Gossip, and as a final pathetic flourish, the $7 coupon for the onesies. Croft listened without interruption, his face impassive. When she was finished, he leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "In my 30 years of practice, I have seen every permutation of spousal malfeasance. But I will admit the diamond necklace for the dog contrasted with your couponing is a particularly vulgar and compelling narrative detail. Juries, and in this case matriarchs, appreciate a clear villain." He picked up the printout of the Gotham Gossip article. "This June De La Renta. We need more on her. Is she a gold digger or something more? Is she aware of the source of the funds? Is she complicit in the fraud against Holloway Properties?" "Fraud?" Cassidy asked. "Oh, absolutely," Croft said with a thin smile. "Your husband is using a publicly traded, or at least a board-governed company to finance his affair. Paying his mistress's rent under the guise of property management is embezzlement. It's wire fraud. It's not just grounds for a spectacular divorce. It's grounds for his immediate removal as CEO. And possibly criminal charges." The word criminal hung in the air. Cassidy felt a chill. This was bigger than she had even realized. "Here is what we are going to do," Croft continued, leaning forward. "My people will conduct a thorough but discreet investigation into Miss De La Renta. We will also perform a forensic accounting of the American Express card and any other accounts we can access. We will build a case so airtight, so damning that by the time we present it, Richard Holloway will have no room to maneuver, lie, or gaslight his way out. He then turned his attention to Caroline. The mother is the key. You are right to identify her as the center of gravity. We will not approach her as a wounded wife. We will approach her as a fellow stakeholder presenting a clear and present danger to her life's work. The presentation must be flawless. No hysterics, just cold, hard facts presented with the gravity they deserve. Over the next 2 weeks, Cassidy lived a strange double life. At home, she was the placid, nesting wife. She played her part perfectly. She would ask Richard about his day, rub his shoulders when he complained of stress from the Hong Kong deal, and discuss baby names with him over dinner. All the while, the lie was a living thing between them, a third presence in their marriage. Richard, arrogant and self-absorbed, noticed nothing. He saw her compliance as proof of his own cleverness. Meanwhile, every day she would speak with Julian Croft or his team. The information they uncovered was even worse than she had imagined. June de la Renta was not just a simple mistress. She was a meticulous operator. She had a history of attaching herself to wealthy, powerful men. Croft's investigators found 2 previous benefactors, both of whom had been discarded when a more promising target appeared. They also discovered that June had been feeding items to Gotham gossip herself, carefully crafting her own public image. The piece about her pampered dog was no accident. It was a calculated move to flaunt her new status, to rub her conquest in the face of the anonymous married benefactor's wife. She was goading Cassidy, enjoying the secret war only she knew she was fighting. The forensic accountants, meanwhile, painted a staggering picture of Richard's deceit. Over the past year alone, he had funneled over $2 million to June through various means: fake art acquisition invoices from her gallery, the fraudulent lease payments, lavish vacations, and a constant stream of gifts from Chanel, Hermes, and of course Cartier. He was systematically looting his own family's company. Croft prepared a formal presentation, a bound report complete with index tabs, financial charts, and photographic evidence. It was a professional document, the kind one would present at a board meeting. It was titled, An Internal Review of Financial Misconduct by CEO Richard Holloway. On the day of the brunch, Croft instructed her, "You will not speak first. You will allow me to set the stage. I will be there representing you in your capacity as a significant shareholder in the Holloway Family Trust, which you are through your marriage. I will frame this as a matter of urgent corporate governance. We will present the facts dispassionately, and then and only then will you speak. You will speak not as a victim, but as the mother of the next Holloway heir, concerned for the future of the legacy her child will one day inherit." The night of the Holloway Foundation Gala arrived. Cassidy wore a custom-made maternity gown in a deep sapphire blue. She looked radiant, her pregnancy giving her a serene glow that belied the storm raging within her. She smiled for the cameras on the red carpet, her hand linked with Richard's. He was proud, showing off his beautiful pregnant wife. He whispered in her ear, "You're the most beautiful woman here." She smiled back at him, a perfect, loving smile, and thought, "You have no idea what's coming for you." The evening was a blur of champagne. Hers was sparkling cider, air kisses, and meaningless conversations. She watched Richard work the room, the charming, powerful CEO. She saw June de la Renta across the ballroom, holding court in a glittering backless red dress. Their eyes met for a brief second. June's lips curved into a tiny, triumphant smirk. It was a look that said, "I have your husband. I have everything." Cassidy didn't flinch. She simply held the other woman's gaze, her expression placid, and then slowly, deliberately let her eyes drift down to her own swollen belly, her hand resting on it protectively. She saw the smirk on June's face vanish, replaced by a flicker of irritation. The game was on. But June, for all her scheming, was playing checkers. Cassidy, with Julian Croft at her side, was about to checkmate the king. The brunch in Greenwich was less than 36 hours away. The Holloway estate in Greenwich was a fortress of old money. A long, winding driveway cut through acres of perfectly manicured lawns, leading to a stone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. It was a place built to project permanence and unassailable power. It was Caroline Holloway's kingdom. Cassidy arrived with Richard, who was in high spirits after the success of the gala. He chattered about the pledges they'd secured, the politicians he'd glad-handed. Cassidy said little, her hands clasped in her lap, her heart a steady rhythmic drum against her ribs. She was not afraid. She was ready. Julian Croft was scheduled to arrive 15 minutes after the brunch began, a strategic delay designed to ensure all the key players were present. As they entered the grand sunroom where the brunch was being held, Cassidy scanned the guests. The entire board of the Holloway Foundation was there, a collection of grim-faced, pinstriped men and women who owed their fortunes and loyalty to the Holloway matriarch. And at the head of a long, formal dining table sat Caroline herself. She was dressed in a Chanel suit the color of cream, her white hair coiffed into a perfect helmet. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, cold and hard as their owner. She offered Cassidy a cheek for a kiss that was as dry as paper. "Cassidy," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "you look large." "Pregnancy will do that," Cassidy replied with a small, tight smile, refusing to be intimidated. Richard, oblivious, kissed his mother warmly. "A triumph last night, Mother, an absolute triumph." It was adequate. Caroline sniffed her highest form of praise. They took their seats. The staff, silent and efficient, began to serve coffee and pastries. The conversation was stilted, focused on financial reports and market projections. Cassidy felt like an actress on a stage waiting for her cue. At precisely 11:15, the butler appeared at the door. "Mrs. Holloway," he announced, his voice hushed. "Mr. Julian Croft is here to see you. He says it is a matter of urgent corporate importance." A murmur went through the room. Julian Croft's name was known to everyone there. His presence at a private family brunch was like a shark appearing in a swimming pool. Richard shot Cassidy a confused look. "Croft?" "The divorce lawyer." "What the hell is he doing here?" Before Cassidy could answer, Caroline spoke, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Show him in." Her eyes, like chips of blue ice, were fixed on Cassidy. She knew at that moment that this was about her. Julian Croft entered the room with an air of absolute authority. He carried a slim leather briefcase. He was not here to make friends. "Mrs. Holloway, members of the board," Croft began, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Julian Croft. I represent Cassidy Holloway, not in a personal capacity, but in her role as a significant stakeholder in the future of this family and this company." He placed his briefcase on a nearby sideboard. "I am here because we have uncovered a pattern of severe financial misconduct and embezzlement on the part of the CEO, Richard Holloway, which poses a direct and immediate threat to the reputation and financial stability of the Holloway Foundation and Holloway Properties." The silence was absolute. Every eye in the room was now on Richard, whose face had gone from confused to ashen. "What the hell is this?" Richard stammered, half rising from his chair. "Cassidy, what is this circus?" "Sit down, Richard," Caroline commanded, her voice low and lethal. She did not look at her son. Her gaze was locked on Croft. "Continue, Mr. Croft." Croft opened his briefcase and took out a dozen bound copies of the report his team had prepared. He had a staff member distribute them to Caroline and each member of the board. He handed one to Richard, who stared at the title, "An Internal Review of Financial Misconduct by CEO Richard Holloway," as if it were a venomous snake. "If you will turn to tab A," Croft said, his tone that of a university lecturer, "you will find a complete forensic accounting of a corporate American Express card controlled exclusively by Mr. Holloway. You will note expenditures over the last fiscal year totaling over $2 million that have no discernible business purpose." He paused as the board members began to flip through the pages, their faces growing grimmer with each turn. "These expenditures include," Croft continued, "first-class travel to locations where Holloway Properties has no interest, such as St. Bart's, weekly entertainment expenses at high-end restaurants, and significant payments to an art gallery owned by a Miss June de la Renta. At the mention of June's name, a flicker of something recognition distaste crossed Caroline's face. She knew who the woman was. "Now please turn to tab B," Croft instructed. "This is a copy of a lease agreement for a penthouse apartment in Soho. The lease is in Miss de la Renta's name. However, as you can see from the corresponding bank statements, the monthly $15,000 rent has been paid directly by a subsidiary of Holloway Properties, fraudulently coded as property management fees. In layman's terms, for the past 18 months, this company has been paying the rent for Mr. Holloway's mistress." A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer just about infidelity. This was about systematic theft from the company they all governed. Richard finally found his voice, a strangled, panicked sound. "This is a lie. A fabrication, Cassidy. How could you? You're being manipulated by this parasite." He glared at Croft. "The evidence is in your hands," Croft said calmly. "It is all verifiable. Bank records, property deeds, signed invoices." He saved the best for last. "And finally, if you will all turn to tab C. This is for context. To understand the character of these expenditures." Tab C contained only 2 documents. On the left was a high-resolution print of the Gotham gossip photo, the pampered dog Prince Maximilian wearing its $20,000 diamond necklace. On the right was a scanned copy of a single humble coupon, $7 off a pack of organic cotton onesies. Croft let the image sink in. He let the board members look from the obscene luxury gifted to a mistress's pet to the pathetic symbol of the wife's frugality. He let them imagine that story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Then and only then did he nod to Cassidy. It was her turn. She stood up, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. She did not look at her husband. She looked directly at her mother-in-law. Her voice when she spoke was not the voice of a hysterical wife. It was the voice of a mother, a protector. "Caroline," she began, using the matriarch's first name for the first time in her life. "For 3 years, I have tried to be the wife this family wanted. I have been quiet. I have been respectful. I have loved your son. And I have been so proud to be carrying the next Holloway heir." Her eyes swept over the shocked faces of the board members. "I did not bring this to you to air my personal grievances. My broken heart is my own business." She then fixed her gaze back on Caroline, her eyes blazing with a fire the woman had never seen before. "I am here because the legacy that you and your husband built is being treated as a personal piggy bank to fund a sordid, pathetic affair. The values of this family, hard work, integrity, discretion, have been replaced by recklessness and breathtaking arrogance. The money that should be securing my child's future, the future of your grandchild, was spent on a diamond necklace for a dog." She let that sentence hang in the air, a monument to her husband's spectacular lack of judgment. "This is not just about infidelity," Cassidy said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is about the rot that has set into the core of this company. It is about a CEO who is a liability, a walking scandal waiting to happen. What happens when this story gets out? And it will get out. What happens to your stock price, to your philanthropic reputation, to the Holloway name?" She took a step towards the head of the table. "You have a choice. You can stand by your son, try to cover this up, and watch as everything you built is tarnished by his recklessness. Or you can do what is necessary. You can cut out the cancer before it kills the patient. You can protect the family. You can protect the future." She finished, her body trembling slightly with adrenaline. The room was deathly quiet. All eyes were on Caroline Holloway. Richard, white-faced and shaking, turned to his mother, his voice pleading. "Mother, don't listen to her. We can fix this. It's a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." Caroline Holloway looked at her son. Her face was a mask of cold fury. For a long moment she said nothing. She simply stared at him, and in her eyes he could see the full weight of her disappointment and disgust. The son she had groomed for greatness had proven to be a fool. She then turned her gaze to Cassidy. There was no warmth in it, no sympathy. But there was something new, a sliver of respect. A respect for the strategy, for the ruthlessness, for the fire she had not known her daughter-in-law possessed. Cassidy had not come to her crying. She had come to her with a business proposition. Protect the empire. Finally, Caroline Holloway spoke, her voice like the cracking of ice. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting him to the bone, "you will resign as CEO of Holloway Properties and from the board of the foundation. Effective immediately, you will check into the company apartment on Park Avenue. Your personal assets will be frozen pending a full audit. You will not contact your friend, Miss De La Renta. You will have no contact with Cassidy. Is that clear?" It wasn't a suggestion. It was an imperial decree. Richard stared at his mother, his mouth agape. He looked at the stony faces of the board members who refused to meet his eyes. He looked at his wife standing tall and resolute, the architect of his ruin. In the space of 20 minutes, his entire world had been dismantled. "Mother, you can't," he started. "I can," Caroline said, her voice final. "And I have. Now get out of my house." Richard Holloway, the millionaire, the titan of industry, stumbled out of the room, a broken man. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. The war was over, and Cassidy, the librarian from Queens, had won. The fallout was swift and merciless. Under Caroline Holloway's cold, efficient direction, Richard was excised from the family business like a malignant tumor. The story was never leaked to the press. The Holloway empire was too powerful for that. Instead, a quiet announcement was made about Richard stepping down for personal health reasons. June De La Renta, cut off from her source of funding, vanished from the society pages as quickly as she had appeared. Her Soho penthouse promptly put back on the market. Cassidy filed for divorce with Julian Croft, ensuring she received a settlement that guaranteed her and her child's financial independence for life. But she took none of the Holloway fortune for herself. It was all placed in a trust for her baby, managed by a neutral third party. She wanted nothing that had been tainted by Richard's deceit. She moved out of the Fifth Avenue penthouse and bought a charming brownstone in Brooklyn, a world away from the icy judgment of the Upper East Side. 3 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Theodore, not after any Holloway ancestor, but after her own father. As she rocked him in the quiet of his nursery, surrounded by the simple, lovingly chosen items she had bought herself, she would sometimes think of the diamond necklace. She thought of the grotesque absurdity of it all. The story of her marriage wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was a lesson in value. She had learned in the most brutal way possible to know her own worth. She had walked through fire not just for herself, but for the little boy in her arms, ensuring he would grow up in a world of authentic love, not gilded lies. Her life was her own, built on her terms, and it was more precious than any diamond Richard Holloway could ever buy. What happens when a picture-perfect life explodes? Catherine Bell was living a fairy tale. Married to the charismatic tech millionaire Alistair Finch, pregnant with their first child and living in a mansion that overlooked the ocean. Then during one lavish dinner with a single, ice-cold sentence, Alistair ended it all. He wanted a divorce, effective immediately. A stunned, pregnant Catherine was left alone in their palace of glass and stone. But what happened next is something no one, least of all Alistair, could have ever predicted. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of an alliance forged in the fire of heartbreak and a fight for justice that would shake an empire to its core. The crystal glasses on the table at Per Se were so fine, Catherine Bell was almost afraid to touch them. They seemed to hum with the quiet, expensive energy of the room, a 3-Michelin-star temple of gastronomy overlooking Columbus Circle. Each plate that arrived was a work of art, a miniature sculpture of foam gelée and impossibly fresh ingredients. It was all so perfect. Too perfect. Catherine shifted in her plush velvet chair, the silk of her emerald green maternity dress whispering against the fabric. At 5 months pregnant, she was just beginning to show a gentle, happy curve that she would often rest her hand upon a silent promise of the future. She smiled across the table at her husband, Alistair Finch. To the outside world, Alistair was a titan. At 38, he was the founder and CEO of Nexus Dynamics, a tech firm that had revolutionized data logistics. His face, with its sharp jawline, intense blue eyes, and perpetually confident smirk, had graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. He moved with an economy of motion, a man who believed every second of his time was worth $1,000. To Catherine, for the past 4 years, he had been the architect of her world. "Is the oysters and pearls to your liking, my love?" Alistair asked, though he didn't look up from his phone. He was scrolling through market data, his thumb moving with practiced speed. "It's incredible," she said, her voice soft. "Everything is. Thank you for this." He finally locked the phone and placed it face down on the pristine white tablecloth, a gesture that was meant to signify his complete attention, but felt more like a temporary ceasefire. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the pale gold liquid. "Catherine," he began, his tone shifting. The warmth that had been there, however faint, evaporated, replaced by the cool, clipped cadence he used in the boardroom. "We need to discuss the future." A thrill of excitement shot through her. Were they finally going to talk about baby names, nurseries? The trip to Tuscany he'd promised for their baby moon. "I'd love to," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I was thinking, if it is a boy, maybe we could honor your father, Michael." Alistair blinked, as if her words were in a foreign language he couldn't be bothered to translate. "No, not that. I'm talking about our future, yours and mine, separately." The air in Catherine's lungs turned to ice. The distant chatter of the restaurant, the gentle clinking of cutlery, all of it faded into a dull, roaring hum in her ears. Separately. What? "What are you talking about, Alistair?" He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated impatience, as if she were a slow employee failing to grasp a simple concept. "I've instructed my lawyer, Mr. Davies, to draw up the divorce papers. They are for all intents and purposes finalized. I wanted to tell you here in a civilized manner before they are served to you at the house tomorrow." Divorce. The word felt alien on her tongue, a jagged stone. "No. You're joking. This is a joke, a horrible, cruel joke." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She looked into his eyes, searching for the man she loved, the man who had whispered promises to her under Egyptian cotton sheets, who had held her hand during the first ultrasound, but she found only a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger. "I am not joking, Catherine. I am never more serious than when it comes to practicalities," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Our marriage is no longer a viable partnership. My circumstances have changed. My needs have changed." "Your circumstances?" Her voice trembled, a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "I'm pregnant, Alistair. I am carrying our child. How have your circumstances possibly changed more than that?" He had the audacity to look bored. "The pregnancy is a complication, I admit, but not an insurmountable one. The child will be provided for. Extravagantly. I have stipulated a very, very generous trust. You in turn will be compensated according to the prenuptial agreement. It's quite ironclad, as I'm sure you'll recall." The prenup. A document she had signed in a haze of love and trust, a 20-page monstrosity his lawyer had slid in front of her a week before their wedding. Alistair had called it a simple corporate formality. She hadn't even read it closely. She had trusted him. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. "Why? Just tell me why. Is it someone else?" He considered the question for a moment, as if weighing the strategic pros and cons of telling the truth. "That is an oversimplification of a complex situation," he said finally. "But yes, there is someone else. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's a business associate. She understands the world I live in, the pressures, the demands." Isabella Rossi. The name struck Catherine like a physical blow. a stunning raven-haired Italian heiress and venture capitalist who had been circling Alistair's company for months. Catherine had met her once at a charity gala. Isabella had looked straight through her, her eyes dismissing Catherine as a pretty but ultimately irrelevant accessory. "So what, you just discard me?" The words were barely a whisper. 4 years. Our baby. It means nothing. It means that it has run its course, Alistair said, placing his napkin on the table. He stood up, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. "The car will take you home. I have another engagement. The papers will arrive around 10 a.m. I would advise you to have a lawyer present, though it will make little difference to the outcome." He didn't lean in to kiss her. He didn't touch her shoulder. He simply turned and walked away, a king leaving his court, never once looking back. Catherine sat there alone at the table for two, surrounded by the debris of a multi-thousand-dollar meal she could no longer eat. The waiter approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, madam?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod, a single jerky motion. The tears she had been holding back began to fall, tracing cold paths down her cheeks, dripping onto the pristine silk of her dress. She was no longer Catherine Bell, wife of a millionaire. She was a complication, a partnership that was no longer viable. The ride home to their sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate was a blur of streetlights and silent sobs. The house, usually a symbol of their shared success and happiness, felt like a mausoleum. It was vast, cold, and achingly empty. Every photo on the wall of them laughing in Bali, skiing in Aspen, celebrating their anniversary, was a monument to a lie. She walked into the master bedroom, a space larger than the apartment she'd grown up in. Alistair's side of the closet was already empty. His valet had been here. It had all been planned. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a corporate extraction executed with chilling precision. She spent the night curled in a guest room, unable to bear the scent of him on their sheets. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, one hand on her belly, feeling the faint fluttering movements of the life inside her. It was the only thing that felt real in a world that had just been shattered into a million pieces. She was alone, pregnant, and about to be divorced by a man who treated her like a defunct asset to be liquidated. Morning came not with sunlight, but with a gray, drizzling rain that matched the despair in her soul. She sat in the cavernous living room, staring out at the manicured lawns that rolled down towards the Long Island Sound. She felt nothing. She was a ghost in her own life. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell chimed, a sound as sharp and final as a guillotine's fall. She thought it was the courier with the divorce papers, the final nail in the coffin of her marriage. Her body tensed, preparing for the next wave of pain. She opened the massive oak door. It wasn't a courier. Standing on the rain-slicked flagstone porch, flanked by 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases, was Eleanor Finch, Alistair's mother. Eleanor was a woman carved from New England granite and old money. Tall, impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat with her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, she possessed an aura of formidable authority. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her son's, held a look that was not pity, but something far more complex, a fierce, unyielding resolve. Catherine stared at her, confused. They had a cordial but distant relationship. Eleanor was polite, but always kept a certain emotional distance, as if observing Catherine from behind a pane of glass. "Eleanor," Catherine stammered. What are you doing here?" Eleanor Finch looked past Catherine into the cold, opulent foyer of the house her son had built. Then her gaze returned to Catherine, softening just slightly as it rested on the small swell of her stomach. "I heard what my son did," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the damp morning air. "He is a fool and a coward. So I packed my bags." She took a step forward, crossing the threshold and bringing the scent of rain and expensive perfume into the house. "If you'll have me," Eleanor Finch declared, "I'm moving in." For a long moment, Catherine could only stare. Eleanor Finch, standing in the marble-floored foyer of the home her son had just ripped from Catherine's life, was an impossible apparition. The woman who had always treated her with a polite, almost clinical distance who sent perfectly chosen impersonal gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, was now standing amidst her designer luggage with the defiant air of a general occupying enemy territory. Catherine's mind, fogged with grief and exhaustion, struggled to process the scene. Was this a trick, a Trojan horse sent by Alistair to manage the situation to ensure she signed the papers without a fuss? The Finch family, she was learning, operated on a level of strategy she was only just beginning to comprehend. "Move in," Catherine finally managed, her voice hoarse. "Eleanor, with all due respect, I don't understand. You're his mother." "And you are the mother of my grandchild," Eleanor retorted, her gaze unwavering. "That is a blood tie, my dear. A biological fact. A marriage certificate, as you have so brutally discovered, is merely a contract. And my son has just demonstrated what he thinks of contracts." She stepped further into the house, her sharp eyes scanning the cavernous impersonal space. It was a show home decorated by a high-priced designer Alistair had hired, filled with modern art he'd bought as an investment and furniture that was more sculpture than comfort. It was a reflection of Alistair himself, impressive, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. "May I have some tea?" Eleanor asked, already shrugging off her cashmere coat. "Earl Grey if you have it. And I suggest you have some chamomile. It will be good for you. And for the baby." It wasn't a request. It was a gentle command. Numbly, Catherine led the way to the state-of-the-art kitchen, a vast expanse of stainless steel and Italian marble that she had never truly felt comfortable in. As she filled the kettle, her hands trembling, Eleanor surveyed the room with a critical eye. "This kitchen is absurd," she commented, running a finger along a sterile countertop. "It's designed for caterers, not for people. No soul." Catherine turned, leaning against the counter, her resolve crumbling. "Why are you really here, Eleanor? Did he send you to what? Make sure I don't make a scene?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's composed expression finally softened, and for the first time Catherine saw a flicker of the woman behind the formidable facade. She saw a deep, weary sadness in her eyes. "Alistair did not send me," Eleanor said, her voice losing its crisp edge, becoming something more intimate. "In fact, he would be incandescent with rage if he knew I was here. I imagine he will be soon enough. I telephoned him this morning after I heard the news from a friend on the board of his company. The Isabella Rossi situation is apparently common knowledge in their circle." She said the name with a quiet, venomous disdain. "I told him," Eleanor continued, "that if he went through with this cruelty, he would not be just divorcing his wife. He would be severing his relationship with his mother. He called my bluff. He told me I was being overly sentimental. So I am here." The kettle began to whistle a shrill scream in the quiet house. Catherine poured the hot water into 2 mugs, her mind still reeling. "But why?" Catherine whispered, handing a mug to her mother-in-law. "He's your son, your only child." Eleanor took the mug and led the way to a small, uncomfortable-looking sofa in the adjacent living area. She sat down perfectly poised and patted the seat next to her. Catherine hesitated for a second before sinking into the cushion. "Catherine, I am going to tell you something I have not spoken of in over 20 years. Eleanor began, her gaze fixed on the gray, rain-lashed view outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I am going to tell you about Michael Finch, Alistair's father. The man was a legend, a Wall Street phantom who had built a colossal fortune in the 80s and died of a sudden heart attack on his yacht in Monaco when Alistair was just a teenager. Alistair rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a mixture of reverence and rivalry. Michael, like Alistair, was brilliant, Eleanor said. He was charming, magnetic. When he focused his attention on you, it felt like standing in the sun. I was young, from a good family, but with little money of my own. I was utterly bewitched. We married, and he gave me a beautiful life. A house much like this one Jules Travel. And a son." She paused, taking a slow sip of her tea. "For 15 years, I believed I was the happiest woman in the world. And then one evening he came home, sat me down in our library, and told me he had met someone else, a younger woman. He informed me that our marriage was over and that his lawyers had an agreement for me to sign. It was non-negotiable. Catherine stared at her, speechless. The parallel was uncanny, a chilling echo down the decades. I was a fool, Eleanor continued, her voice laced with the memory of old pain. I had no resources of my own. I had signed a prenuptial agreement just like you did without truly understanding what it meant. I was completely dependent on him. He told me I could have the house and a comfortable allowance provided I was discreet. If I fought him, he would cut me off entirely and paint me as an unstable shrew in the press. I was trapped. I had a teenage son to think about. What did you do? Catherine breathed. I signed the papers, Eleanor said, a flash of fire in her eyes. I took the deal, and I hated myself for it every single day. I smiled at society functions, raised my son, and maintained the facade of the dignified ex-wife. But inside I was hollowed out. Michael died 2 years later, and his fortune, the bulk of it, went to his new wife. Alistair and I were left with a trust fund that, while substantial, was a pittance compared to his true wealth. She turned to face Catherine fully. I watched my son grow up idolizing a man who was a brilliant monster. I tried to teach him empathy, to instill in him a sense of decency, to warn him against becoming his father. I thought I had succeeded. I see now that I failed. The worst parts of Michael didn't die with him. They lay dormant in Alistair, and his success has watered them, made them grow. What he is doing to you, it is not just an echo of his father. It is a perfect, monstrous replication. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't pity. This was a reckoning. Eleanor wasn't just here for Catherine. She was here for the ghost of her younger self, for the woman who had been forced to surrender. A single fat tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. He said I was no longer a viable partnership. That is Michael's language. Eleanor spat, her composure finally breaking into raw anger. Cold, transactional, cruel. He is erasing you just as his father erased me. But this time is different. How? Catherine asked, her voice thick with despair. The prenup. He said it's ironclad. There is no such thing as an ironclad agreement when a man is hiding his true worth and acting in bad faith, Eleanor declared. And more importantly, this time, there are two of us, and I am no longer a frightened, financially dependent girl. I have my own money, my own connections. And you, she said, her eyes falling to Catherine's stomach, have the ultimate leverage. You carry the Finch legacy, not Isabella Rossi. You. Just then the doorbell chimed again, a different sound this time, sharper, more insistent. Both women froze. That will be the papers, Catherine whispered, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over her. Eleanor stood up, her back ramrod straight. I'll get it. She walked to the door and opened it. A young man in a courier's uniform stood there, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. For Catherine Bell, he said. I will take it. Eleanor said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She signed the device, took the portfolio, and shut the door. She walked back into the living room and placed the document on the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. It was embossed with the logo of a prestigious, ruthless law firm. Catherine stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. All the fight that had begun to stir in her withered. It's over, she said, her voice flat. He's won. Nonsense. Eleanor snapped, her energy galvanizing the room. She picked up her phone from her purse. This is not an ending. This is the beginning of a negotiation. And we will not be using a lawyer Alistair would expect. We will not be using a lawyer from his world at all. She scrolled through her contacts, her painted fingernail tapping decisively on the screen. When my husband left me, I was given a list of appropriate legal representatives. Quiet, dignified men who would manage my surrender gracefully. But there was one name I heard whispered, a woman they told me to avoid at all costs. They called her a shark, a bulldog. They said she was unladylike in her tactics. A slow smile spread across Eleanor Finch's face A genuinely predatory, beautiful thing. I have kept her number for 22 years, hoping I would never need it. It seems I was saving it for you. She pressed the call button. Yes, hello, she said, her voice pure steel. My name is Eleanor Finch. I am calling on behalf of my daughter-in-law, Catherine Bell. We need to book a consultation with Ms. Juliana Hayes. Yes, I'm aware of her hourly rate. That will not be a problem. We'll be there this afternoon. Juliana Hayes's office was not in the expected glass tower in Midtown. Instead, it occupied the top floor of a renovated cast-iron building in Soho, a neighborhood of art galleries and fashion boutiques. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that felt more like a modern art installation than a law firm. The walls were stark white, adorned with large, aggressive, abstract paintings in black and red. The furniture was minimalist, uncomfortable-looking, and brutally chic. There was no soothing music, only the low hum of the city outside. It was a space that did not offer comfort. It demanded respect. A young man with an impossibly sharp haircut and an all-black suit greeted them. Ms. Finch, Ms. Bell. Ms. Hayes will see you now. He led them down a hallway to a corner office with panoramic windows, and there, standing against the backdrop of the New York skyline like a general surveying her battlefield, was Juliana Hayes. She was not what Catherine had expected. She was in her late 40s, petite and wiry, dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue dress that was both severe and stylish. Her dark hair was cut in a severe geometric bob that framed a face with high cheekbones and intelligent dissecting eyes. She didn't smile as they entered. She simply watched them, her expression a neutral mask of assessment. Eleanor, Juliana said, her voice a low, precise alto. It has been a long time. I'm sorry for the circumstances. She gestured towards the two chairs opposite her large, uncluttered glass desk. Please. As they sat, Juliana's gaze shifted to Catherine. It wasn't unkind, but it was intensely analytical, as if she were scanning Catherine for weaknesses. Mrs. Bell. She began, using the formal address Eleanor has given me, the broad strokes. Your husband, Alistair Finch, has served you with a proposal for dissolution of marriage. You are 5 months pregnant with his child. He has, I presume, offered you the bare minimum stipulated in your prenuptial agreement. Catherine, feeling small and exposed in the powerful room, could only nod. He called it generous. A dry, almost silent laugh escaped Juliana's lips. Men like Alistair Finch always do. They believe their table scraps are a feast for the rest of us. May I see the documents? Eleanor slid the leather-bound portfolio across the vast expanse of the glass desk. For the next 20 minutes, silence descended upon the room, broken only by the whisper of pages turning. Juliana read with terrifying focus, her eyes scanning line after line. Occasionally she would make a small note on a legal pad with a silver pen, her handwriting as sharp and precise as her appearance. Catherine felt her anxiety build with every passing second. She watched Juliana's face for any sign of hope, but the lawyer's expression remained unreadable. Finally, Juliana reached the last page, closed the portfolio, and folded her hands on top of it. She looked directly at Catherine. This, she said, tapping the portfolio, is a work of art, a masterpiece of legal warfare designed to leave you with absolutely nothing. The bluntness of the statement hit Catherine like a physical blow. Mr. Davies, his lawyer, is very good at his job. Juliana continued, her tone clinical. The agreement you signed is a fortress. Every clause is designed to strip you of any claim to marital assets. It defines marital property so narrowly that the only thing you are likely entitled to is a fraction of the value of the furniture. It waives your right to spousal support beyond a token time-limited amount. It attributes the vast increase in his net worth during your marriage solely to pre-existing business interests, effectively shielding his entire empire from you. On paper, it is, as your husband likely told you, ironclad. Eleanor leaned forward. But Juliana's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. But fortresses have cracks, and masterpieces can be flawed. This document, for all its technical brilliance, has two fundamental weaknesses. She held up one finger. One, fraudulent inducement. Eleanor, when you signed your agreement with Michael, was it presented to you as a non-negotiable condition of marriage with little time for independent review? Yes, Eleanor said instantly. It was positioned as a mere formality a week before the wedding. I was told that to question it was to question his love. Juliana looked at Catherine. And you? Catherine thought back to the haze of her engagement. The same. Exactly the same. Alistair said it was something his board of directors required. His lawyer, Mr. Davies, was there. He was very charming. He explained it was just to protect the company. I had a lawyer, but he was a friend of my father's who handled real estate. He was completely out of his depth. He advised me to sign it. Of course he did, Juliana said with a sigh. We will argue that you were coerced, that you were not given adequate time or competent independent counsel, and that the terms were so unconscionable as to be unenforceable. It's a difficult argument to win, but it creates a nuisance. It muddies the water. She held up a second finger. Weakness number 2 is far more significant. Full and frank financial disclosure. A prenuptial agreement is only valid if both parties accurately disclose their assets at the time of signing. More importantly, in a divorce proceeding, both parties are required to disclose their current assets. Men like Alistair Finch and his father before him do not like disclosure. They build their empires in the shadows. They use shell corporations' offshore accounts and tangled webs of trusts to hide their true worth. They present one picture to the IRS, another to the SEC, and a third, much smaller one, to their divorcing wives. Her voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial exciting. Our job is not to attack the prenup head-on. Our job is to demand a forensic accounting of every single penny Alistair Finch has. We will subpoena his company, his partners, his investment managers. We will make the process of disclosure so invasive, so expensive, and so potentially revealing of things he does not want revealed that his ironclad agreement suddenly becomes a very heavy anchor. Catherine felt a flicker of hope, the first she'd felt in what seemed like an eternity. You think he's hiding money? Juliana laughed again, a sharp metallic sound. My dear, a man worth $1 billion on paper is almost certainly worth $2 or $3 billion in reality. The question is not if he's hiding it. The question is where. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Which brings us to the child. Her gaze softened for the first time as she looked at Catherine's stomach. This is not just a divorce anymore. This is a matter of child support and inheritance. The state of Connecticut has guidelines for child support, but those guidelines become suggestions when dealing with high net worth individuals. We will argue that this child is entitled to a lifestyle commensurate with his father's true wealth. Not a trust fund controlled by Alistair, but direct, substantial, court-ordered support. We will demand private schools, security nannies, dedicated housing, travel. We will create a budget for this child that will make his eyes water. But more than that, she went on, her eyes locking with Eleanor's, this child is the Finch heir, the only carrier of his bloodline. This makes his affair with Isabella Rossi look not just callous but foolish. He is discarding the mother of his legacy for a temporary amusement. We will not say this in court, of course, but we will make sure it is understood in the court of public opinion and in the boardrooms of his company. The scope of it, the sheer aggression, was terrifying and exhilarating. This was not a legal dispute. It was war waged with subpoenas and forensic accountants instead of soldiers. Now, Juliana said, her tone shifting back to business, this will be a brutal, ugly, and very public fight. Alistair will not play fair. He will hire private investigators. They will dig into your past, your family, your friends. They will try to paint you as a gold digger, an unstable, hysteric, and unfit mother. They will leak stories to the press. Are you prepared for that? She asked, her eyes boring into Catherine. Catherine looked at her hands, then at Eleanor, whose face was a mask of grim determination. She thought of Alistair's cold, dismissive face at the restaurant. She thought of him calling their baby a complication. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to burn in her chest. "What do you need me to do?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet but firm. A slow, satisfied smile finally graced Juliana Hayes's lips. It transformed her face, making her look like the shark the old guard lawyers whispered about. "Good," she said. "First, you and Eleanor will go back to that house, and you will not leave. It is your marital home. Do not let him intimidate you into leaving. From this moment on, all communication goes through me. You do not speak to him. You do not answer his calls. If he shows up, you do not let him in. You call me." She slid a notebook and the silver pen across the desk to Catherine. "Second, you will start a journal. Document everything. Every interaction you've ever had concerning finances. Every promise he ever made. Every conversation about the baby. Dates, times, locations, details. His casual mention of buying a private island, the small loan he gave to a friend, the antique watch he bought that was worth more than a car. These are the threads we will pull. Third," she said, looking at Eleanor, "you know the world he comes from, the people, the places. We need to find his pressure points. A board member who values family. An old rival who would love to see him stumble. We need leverage outside the courtroom." Juliana stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My retainer is $100,000. Eleanor has assured me this is not an issue. We will begin discovery immediately. This will be a long road, Catherine. But I promise you this, by the time we are done, Alistair Finch will learn that a viable partnership is a two-way street, and that his complication is about to become the most expensive problem he has ever had." Leaving the office and stepping back into the Soho streets, Catherine felt different. The fog of grief had not lifted, but it was pierced by a single sharp beam of light. She was no longer a victim adrift in the wreckage of her life. She was a client, a combatant. Alongside her formidable mother-in-law, she had just hired a shark, and they were going hunting. Returning to the Greenwich estate was a profoundly different experience. The house was no longer a cold, lonely mausoleum of a failed marriage. With Eleanor Finch striding through its halls, it had become a fortress, a command center. The air, once thick with Catherine's despair, now crackled with purpose. A siege was coming, and they were preparing the ramparts. That very afternoon, a locksmith summoned by Eleanor arrived and discreetly changed every lock on the property. The household staff, a chef, a housekeeper, and a groundskeeper, all hired and paid by Alistair, were politely but firmly given 2 weeks of paid leave. "We need privacy," Eleanor had told them, her tone brokering no argument. She then arranged for groceries to be delivered, and to Catherine's astonishment began methodically and expertly cleaning the soulless kitchen herself. "When you are at war," Eleanor stated, wiping down a marble surface with a vigor that belied her age and station, "you control your supply lines and you eliminate potential spies. Alistair pays their salaries. Their loyalty is to him." For Catherine, this new reality was disorienting but grounding. The overwhelming grief still washed over her in waves, but now it was tempered by a new, unfamiliar feeling agency. Following Juliana's instructions, she took the expensive leather-bound notebook intended for a wedding guest list and repurposed it as her war journal. She sat in the morning room, the rain still streaking down the glass panes, and began to write. At first her mind was blank, a canvas of pain. But then she started small, remembering a conversation from last Christmas at Alistair's ski lodge in Aspen. December 26th. Alistair was on a conference call in front of the fireplace. I brought him a brandy. He was laughing with someone on the phone. After he hung up, he was giddy. He kissed me and said, "The deal in Dubai is done. I had to pay our consultant an absolute fortune, but it's worth it." I asked who the consultant was. He just winked and said, "A very helpful little P.O. box in the Cayman Islands." He thought it was hilarious. He called it Nexus Dynamics Atlantic. The memory, innocuous at the time, now seemed sinister. She wrote it down, her handwriting shaky but clear. Another memory surfaced. A charity auction in New York 2 years ago. April 2 years ago. The Met Gala. Alistair was trying to get a zoning variance for a new data center. Senator Thompson was the keynote speaker. Alistair won the bidding on a terrible painting for $250,000. When we got in the car, I said it was a lot to pay for an ugly painting. He laughed and said, "I didn't buy a painting, I bought a zoning variance. The senator's favorite charity will be very grateful." She kept writing the threads pulling loose from the tapestry of their life together. The offhand remark about the 3 different sets of books his accountants kept, one for me, one for my partners, and one for Uncle Sam. The time he'd boasted that his real net worth was an imaginary number, because so much of it was tied up in untraceable art and offshore holding companies designed to be invisible. Each memory was a small, sharp stone she was adding to her side of the scales. While Catherine mined the past, Eleanor was working the present. She sat in the formal living room, her posture perfect, her phone to her ear. Her conversations were masterpieces of subtlety. "Meredith, darling, how lovely to hear your voice," she cooed to the wife of Marcus Thorne, the most influential member of Nexus Dynamics' board of directors. "Yes, I'm staying with Catherine for a bit. She needs me. Oh, you know, Alistair is going through a difficult phase. It's so reminiscent of his father. You remember that terrible business with the younger woman? He became so erratic, so unpredictable. His judgment was impaired. It's heartbreaking to see the pattern repeat. One worries about the stability of things you know with the company. This Isabella Rossi. I've heard she encourages his worst impulses." She would pause, letting the poison seep in. "Of course I'm sure it's nothing. He's a brilliant boy. But a man with a pregnant wife at home making such rash decisions. It does make one wonder. Do give Marcus my best." She was not attacking. She was expressing concern. She was planting a seed of doubt not in Alistair's morality, but in something far more important to a man like Marcus Thorne, his stability and, by extension, the security of his investment. The first counterattack from Alistair came 2 days later. Catherine's phone rang, and his face, a smiling selfie from their trip to Bali, flashed on the screen. Her heart leaped into her throat. Her first instinct, born of 4 years of conditioning, was to answer. Eleanor, who seemed to possess a sixth sense, walked into the room. "Don't," she said, her voice calm. "Let it ring." Catherine stared at the phone, her hand trembling as it rang and rang before finally falling silent. A text message immediately followed. "Catherine, pick up the phone. We need to talk. Don't be childish." Another came a minute later. "Are you seriously having my mother screen my calls? This is absurd. I will not have my personal life dictated by some overpriced lawyer. I am coming over." The message sent a jolt of pure terror through her. "He's coming," she whispered, holding the phone out to Eleanor. Eleanor read the text, and her lips thinned into a hard line. "Good," she said. "Let him." An hour later, the sleek black form of Alistair's McLaren supercar crunched up the gravel driveway. He got out dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking every inch the master of the universe returning to his castle. He strode to the front door and tried his key. It didn't fit. He tried it again, jamming it in with force. The sound of metal grating against the new lock was loud in the quiet house. He stepped back, a look of pure disbelief on his face, and pressed the doorbell, a long, angry buzz. Catherine and Eleanor stood in the foyer watching the video feed from the security camera on a tablet. Alistair's face, handsome and familiar, was twisted into a mask of rage. "Catherine!" he shouted, his voice muffled by the thick oak door. "Open this door right now! This is my house!" Eleanor calmly pressed the button for the intercom. "Alistair!" Her voice boomed out onto the porch, cool and clear. "You are no longer welcome here. This is Catherine's marital home." On the screen, Alistair looked as if he'd been slapped. "Mother, what in God's name are you doing? Let me in." "No," Eleanor's voice replied through the speaker. "You have made your choice. You chose to abandon your pregnant wife. You do not get to choose the consequences. If you have anything to say to Catherine, you can say it through her lawyer. Now please leave the premises before you are filmed trespassing." "My lawyer!" He roared, laughing a bitter, ugly sound. You think Juliana Hayes is going to scare me? I will bury you. I will bury both of you in legal fees. I will prove Catherine is an unfit mother. I will take my child. You will do nothing of the sort. Eleanor interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. Your father tried this same pathetic bullying Alistair. He tried to intimidate me, to threaten me. It was beneath him then, and it is beneath you now. You are behaving like a cornered animal, not the titan of industry you pretend to be. Leave. Catherine, watching, felt a surge of courage. She stepped forward and pressed the talk button herself. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear. Leave Alistair. Speak to my lawyer. On the screen, his face registered pure shock. It was one thing to be defied by his mother, whom he considered a sentimental relic. It was another to be defied by Catherine, the woman he had deemed docile and disposable. He stared at the camera, his blue eyes burning with a cold fire. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel, stalked back to his car, and sped away, spitting gravel from his tires. Catherine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her legs feeling weak. Eleanor put a firm, steadying hand on her shoulder. The first charge has been repelled, she said quietly. Well done. The true counteroffensive landed the next day, not at their door but in the heart of Alistair's empire. In his gleaming office overlooking Manhattan, Alistair was meeting with his lawyer, the smooth and unflappable Mr. Davies. She's refusing to speak with me, Alistair raged, pacing in front of the windows. They've changed the locks. My mother is in there with her, plotting against me. Mr. Davies, a man who specialized in quiet, orderly dissolutions, looked uncomfortable. Alistair, I warned you that this approach was aggressive. It was bound to provoke a reaction. It's a negotiation tactic, Alistair snapped. She'll fold. Just then, Davies' assistant entered, carrying a box so thick with paper it looked like a ream of printer stock. This just arrived by courier for you, Mr. Davies, from the offices of Juliana Hayes. Davies opened the box. His calm, professional demeanor began to dissolve as he lifted out the first document. It was a single-spaced, 200-page request for financial discovery. It demanded everything. Every personal and corporate tax return for the last 10 years, every bank statement from every account, domestic and international, every stock transaction, every email related to the formation of any shell company or trust, full documentation on the purchase of all art and property, including the consulting fees for the Dubai deal and the donation to Senator Thompson's charity. It was a legal shock and awe campaign. It was an invoice for the war to come. Davies paled. He looked up at his client, the bravado gone from his face. Alistair, he said, his voice grim, this is not a negotiation tactic. She's not trying to get a better settlement. He held up the massive document. She's trying to get your entire company. Alistair reacted to Juliana's aggressive financial inquiries with full-scale warfare. His legal team swiftly filed motions to block the subpoenas, labeling them frivolous harassment. Simultaneously, Alistair weaponized the media against Catherine. A scathing tabloid article depicted her as a ruthless gold digger exploiting her pregnancy for money. Photographers and surveillance vehicles lingered outside her home, escalating her stress and anxiety. Eleanor, ever composed, shielded Catherine fiercely. He wants you to crumble, she counseled, strengthening Catherine's resolve. Your strength is your greatest asset. Amidst sleepless nights, Catherine's meticulous journaling revealed a pivotal memory: their third anniversary trip to St. Bart's. Alistair had shown her a corporate structure labeled Project Chimera, boasting it was an untraceable Liechtenstein foundation holding Nexus Dynamics' most valuable patents. Catherine recalled his chilling remark clearly. It's legal if you can afford the lawyers to make it legal. When Catherine shared this crucial discovery, Eleanor immediately arranged a secure call with Juliana Hayes. Project Chimera, Juliana repeated sharply, excitement evident in her voice. Liechtenstein means secrecy, tax evasion, asset hiding, corporate fraud. This could escalate beyond divorce court to criminal charges. Catherine hesitated, troubled by the idea of Alistair facing prison. He built this trap himself, Eleanor gently reminded her. Not you. Precisely, Juliana interjected. This is leverage. If Alistair fights disclosure, he risks contempt of court. Compliance reveals the fraud. Plus, this revelation will terrify his board, turning his personal scandal into corporate catastrophe. Armed with this powerful insight, Juliana swiftly amended their legal filings to specifically target Project Chimera. Alistair's facade was finally unraveling. Within 24 hours, Juliana filed a precise, devastating motion with the court. It detailed the existence of Project Chimera, a Liechtenstein foundation hiding Nexus Dynamics' core intellectual property. The implication was clear: Alistair had committed corporate fraud. Alistair Finch stared at the document, stunned. How could they know? He asked desperately, looking at his shaken lawyer. I don't know, but they do, Davies responded gravely. This isn't a bluff. If a judge grants this motion, and they likely will, we must either produce evidence that reveals your fraud or face contempt of court. Stop it, Alistair ordered. Appeal delay, do something. Davies shook his head firmly. It's too late. Juliana Hayes has cornered you perfectly. This isn't divorce law. It's criminal territory now. Across town, Eleanor Finch executed her final strategic move. At a discreet lunch with Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Nexus Dynamics board, she expressed grave concern about Alistair's reckless actions, subtly dropping mentions of Liechtenstein. That evening, Marcus called an emergency board meeting confronting Alistair with Juliana's motion. Did you really think you could hide assets from us? Project Chimera puts the entire company at risk. The board swiftly stripped Alistair of his power and launched a forensic audit. His personal life unraveled just as quickly. Isabella Rossi, his lover, coldly dismissed him, branding him a toxic liability. Shattered and alone, Alistair saw clearly that only one option remained: total surrender. The next morning, his assistant called the Greenwich house. Mr. Finch requests a meeting with Mrs. Bell, she said timidly. At her convenience. Eleanor glanced at Catherine, visibly pregnant and resolute. Tell Mr. Finch she will meet him here tomorrow at noon. Catherine sat calmly in the sunlit morning room as Alistair entered, defeated and humbled. I'm sorry, he began weakly, but Catherine stopped him sharply. You're sorry you got caught. Juliana's terms are final. He read the brutal conditions. Catherine receives the Greenwich estate outright, and $200 million in a trust for Catherine and their child, controlled exclusively by Catherine. Catherine has full custody. Alistair allowed supervised visits only after extensive therapy. Alistair publicly retracts defamatory stories about Catherine. Details of Project Chimera sealed permanently, conditional on his compliance. My child, Alistair pleaded desperately. You called our child a complication, Catherine responded coldly. This agreement ensures you won't hurt us again. Sign or lose everything. Defeated and knowing his fate, Alistair quietly nodded. You'll have it today. As he left, Catherine realized the battle was over. She had reclaimed control of her life, emerging stronger and surrounded by true family. The Alistair Finch, who approached the house, bore little resemblance to the confident millionaire who had abandoned Catherine months earlier. His sharp features were softened by defeat, his tailored suit now ill-fitting, as if the man inside had shrunk. Catherine watched him enter the morning room, sunlight framing her calm expression as she rested a hand protectively on her rounded belly. Eleanor stood silently beside the fireplace, her presence resolute. Catherine, Alistair began, his voice strained. Thank you for seeing me. She nodded slightly, her composure unwavering. The shift in power was clear. She was in control, and he was here to plead. I'm sorry, he stammered, his gaze faltering under her steady eyes. For how I told you what I said, everything. I wasn't thinking clearly. She raised a hand, gently stopping him. "You're sorry because you got caught, Alistair, not because you hurt me." He visibly flinched, the blunt truth piercing his practiced facade. She let the silence linger before calmly sliding a single sheet of paper toward him. "Juliana drafted these terms. They're not negotiable." Alistair's hands trembled as he read. The house Catherine would retain the Greenwich estate debt-free. The settlement $200 million placed in a trust controlled solely by Catherine and Juliana Hayes for their child's future. Custody. Catherine would have exclusive custody. Alistair would only receive supervised visitation rights after completing 1 year of professional therapy. Public retraction. Alistair would publicly withdraw all defamatory claims against Catherine. Silence. In return for his agreement, details of Project Chimera would remain confidential. Alistair looked up, color draining from his face. "Catherine, please, my child, you can't. You called our baby a complication. You were ready to discard us," Catherine replied steadily. "I learned family for you was disposable. This agreement protects my family from you. You'll provide for your child materially, but your influence stops there. Sign it or risk everything." He glanced toward Eleanor, searching for sympathy, but finding none, only silent judgment. Realizing he had no leverage, Alistair gave a broken nod. "You'll have it signed by my lawyers today," he said quietly, rising and leaving without another word. 6 months later, the morning room had transformed from a battlefield into a warm, inviting nursery filled with soft colors and gentle laughter. Catherine rocked gently, cradling her daughter, named Eleanor, Catherine Finch Ellie. The elder Eleanor stepped into the room, her stern demeanor softened into joyful grandmotherly warmth. "How's our angel?" she whispered, brushing a kiss across the baby's forehead. "Perfect," Catherine replied softly, smiling up at the woman who had become her strongest ally and closest family. Occasional news trickled in about Alistair. He had avoided prison, but his empire had collapsed. Isabella Rossi moved on, leaving him completely alone. Catherine felt no anger, no sadness, only calm indifference. Alistair was a closed chapter. Looking around the sunny nursery at her peaceful child and the loyal woman beside her, Catherine knew she'd gained something infinitely richer than Alistair's fortune. Strength, resilience, and the bond of family forged in the fiercest fire. From the ashes of a shocking betrayal, Catherine Bell didn't just rise. She soared. With her mother-in-law Eleanor as her unexpected ally, she turned a story of heartbreak into an epic tale of justice and empowerment. They took on a ruthless billionaire and his army of lawyers and proved that true strength isn't about the money in your bank account, but the courage in your heart and the loyalty of those who stand with you. This was more than a divorce. It was a revolution.